Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3 Ways CEOs Should Rely on Data to Build Enterprise Resilience. This is the final installation of a 3-part webinar series called A CEO's Guide to a More Resilient Enterprise. My name is Melissa Cahoe, and I am the Global Practice Strategist for Security, Risk, and Resilience at New Rocket. I have 20 years of experience in a variety of roles, but the most important thing is that I have spent the better part of my career helping organizations build better GRC programs, better security operation programs. And the thing that's rung the most true for me has been that regardless of whether we're building a risk management program, a vulnerability response program, a business continuity management program, or a security incident response program, we're all trying to help and service the same common goal, which is creating a more resilient organization and a more resilient company. And it's useful to think about things that way because that starts to galvanize and bring teams together to a common goal and helping organizations work more efficiently together. Before I move on, I think it's important for me to talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about resilience. Resilient organizations are able to better withstand change and experience adverse events, and are when they come out of them, actually end up being stronger. Resilient organizations are adaptable, they are agile, and they have empowered leadership and empowered teams. And studies have shown, both in the 2008 Great Recession, as well as in the 2020 pandemic, resilient organizations came out more profitable than their non-resilient peers. Enough about resilience, well, not enough about resilience, but at least enough about the description and the explanation of resilience. But I'd like to hear specifically from you. What do you hope to get out of this webinar? Please feel free to let me know in the chat. I'll give everybody a couple of seconds to let them post things in. You can just barely see the cat out there. Her name is Maliki. She'll probably be sleeping the entire time. I do have a director of data management who's interested in building better data programs. See if we hear from anybody else. The reason this is helpful is sometimes if you have something you would really like to be covered, we can actually bring it up to you throughout the webinar, or we can at least try. We've also got a ServiceNow platform manager who is looking for better ways to manage their CMDB. That's their content management database. And we will be touching on that, but we won't necessarily be diving explicitly on how ServiceNow functions, but we'll be talking about the better strategies that can help. And then we have an operations manager who wants to stop the data chaos, which I can completely understand and appreciate. I've done operation roles myself. The data, especially in organizations like larger organizations, can be overwhelming. Let's discuss what you will be getting out of this webinar. So today you'll learn how to identify which processes and data actually matter and why, how to assemble the building blocks of a robust resilience program, and establish the criteria for trustworthy data. We've heard about me, so I don't need to introduce myself, but I'd like to open the stage to my fellow panelists, Aaron Calloway and Kirk Hogan. Aaron, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Melissa. Yes, this is Aaron Calloway. I'm a global principal with ServiceNow. And similar to Melissa, I'm pretty passionate about overall resiliency and overall governance and risk and compliance, and really dedicated my career to resiliency, business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management, and really how data drives these programs. It really is the glue that makes all these things come together. So really, happy to extend this conversation here. So Kirk.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Kirk Hogan. I'm the global strategist for technology currently for the ServiceNow practice within New Rocket. Prior to that, though, the last 25, 30 years, I've been in operations support, system development, risk and security strategy. I did start way back in the day actually coding on the platform, so I understand the development process, but responsible for everything related to the platform, integrations, custom app development, or the platform on ServiceNow.
Great. So we have a group of people who are super passionate about data, so this should be an excellent conversation. So a couple of pieces of housekeeping items. Please turn off your phone, close your social media. We will say some amazing things, but you can wait to tweet about it or put it on LinkedIn. And just let everybody know you'll be busy for the next 45 minutes. Take notes on any action steps that you want to implement after the webinar is over. And please prepare your questions for a Q&A segment at the end. And please feel free, if you find that you have some questions about what we're discussing, please feel free to put it in the chat. If we can address it, then we will. If not, we'll just sort of punt it to the end and we'll make sure we get to your question at that point. Q&A is my favorite part. It's when we really get to interact with the audience. So I'm really looking forward to the questions. I believe that for a lot of you, since you're here, these problems should sound familiar. Every simple question that you're asking is probably coming back with multiple answers or complex responses. So you might ask a question like, where am I most exposed? What do I need to worry about next? And you may end up with a very complex and not a binary response or a straightforward answer. You get different answers for the same question, depending on to whom you ask. So you might get different responses, whether you're asking your IT teams or your security teams or your risk teams. And a lot of these answers also lack a solid and traceable reasoning, and they're not transparent. You don't know the methodology that was beneath that answer, nor do you know like how it was done and whether or not you can trust that answer. These problems happen when organizations don't have fully trustworthy and visible data. And I'd really like to hand this over to my colleague, Kirk, to talk about why this is so important and some of the challenges we're seeing.
So I think what's important is if we break down this phrase a little bit, trustworthy and visible data. I think in organizations, we like to see things before we can apply a level of trust to it, which is hard to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about, the types of systems, number of systems, et cetera. In fact, over 75% of executives don't have a high level of trust in their data. Trust is subjective, but it's also something that you achieve over time by getting some feedback from the things that you do based on the information you have. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, 78% of the CISOs have over 16% tools just within their cybersecurity portfolio, which brings us to the next point. The best way to ensure transparency is to unify around one platform. And because the essence of this whole talk today is around resiliency, I think it's important to understand who are we being resilient against. I've spent a lot of time in my career working with some security teams, some incident response teams who've had exposure to the criminal element. It is real. It is absolutely all around us. We see stories in the newspaper all the time. What the criminal element wants of these organizations, of your organization or any organization, is they want you to have data chaos, to come back to that whole leading point that somebody's very interested in. They want you to use multiple systems to perform the same function. They want you to be confused about who's doing what and the processes that support your business. They don't want you to unify around one platform. Mm-hmm. Because if you start to unify around one platform, you start to see trends, you start to see these linkages, you can build relationships that you can then trust. So I actually love this phrase, because if you really want to see things, that's that transparency, you need to have your things in a single place. Doesn't mean you can't connect out, but it means that you need to be around one platform.
And I think that bringing everything together and helping to unify also helps decrease the attack surface, and also helps you trust the understanding of what your attack surface is as it sort of ebbs and flows and changes with your organization.
Yeah.
So let's dive in. 3 steps to a better visibility and trust. Start with action 1. So step 1, we want to identify which processes and or processes, depending on the country you're in, and data actually matter and why. Aaron, why is this so important for you?
Yeah, well, like I said in the intro, data is really the glue for a lot of these programs, and certainly having one platform with one data set will bring us all together in using the same kind of playing field. But a lot of times I like to start off with reporting. What is important for organizations to get to a resilient enterprise, right? We're not really talking about, we want to move beyond just a, continuity program or a resiliency program to resilient enterprises. And what does that mean for organizations? What are those KPIs? What are the data that we need to drive the outcomes that we're looking for? And by defining those reporting elements that are necessary to continue this vision of overall enterprise resiliency, then we want to look at, okay, what are we going to report on? What's the data that we need? And how are we going to maintain it? There's many times where I see a lot of organizations with these great intentions of having these massive dashboards, until they really get into it and understand the maintenance of this data isn't worth the squeeze per se. And so really starting out in getting some of these small wins to help mature your program and defining the data up front that will drive your reporting is really a good way to make sure that you're targeting in a efficient manner as you mature your program.
I also think if we can go right back to the beginning, Melissa, when you identified what resilience was, I'd like to add on to that definition a little bit. And I like to think of resilience as being able to continue to operate under stress. It's a pretty simple phrase, but when we think about it now, and we're talking about identifying the processes and the data that matter, the truth is most organizations don't really want software, not unless you're developing software. What businesses want is they want the outcomes from the products or services that they're trying to take to market. It just happens that taking those things to market requires some processes. And a lot of the processes in today's world are digitally supported through information technology. That's how we get down to where we're actually having the discussion today. So how do we allow an organization to continue to operate under stress? So it isn't about the entire business. It's being able to dissect or assess your business for what are those key processes that support those products and services that you're taking to market. And it doesn't matter whether you're profit or not for profit. It just, what are you taking to market? Because if you can identify those key processes, they're going to be supported by sub processes and ancillary processes. But by being able to understand what would happen if a key process went down, you can actually assess the stress on the business that would cause. And now you can start to understand what is supporting that. Remember, I said nobody wants software, but we have it because we need that to support our processes. But if we can start to understand what that hierarchy of relationships are, we can identify the software, we can identify the information technology that sits on, and the data that will drive that process. Then we can start to make some very targeted actions on what do we need to be resilient for this part of our business? What do we need to be resilient on this part of the business? That's why I think this step is so critical at the first. So where do we start?
And I think that a lot of companies, they don't always take that time to say, okay, what are the key processes that if I did not have them, I would no longer be able to do business. And if you start with those sort of key critical processes and try and focus on, okay, then now what are the underlying objects underneath? So if I have a process, for example, New Rocket, we provide services to our customers. How do we make sure what needs to continue to work to provide those services for the customer? It almost becomes like it spiders down.
Yeah. And Aaron, this is a little bit of your world, but I think people are afraid to assign value to a process. And I would recommend just be bold. Put a number against some process or something, and then you're right until somebody comes along with better math. I'd be interested in your opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to start somewhere, right? And then the more eyeballs you have on the data, the more trustworthy the data becomes. We see a lot of organizations with a lot of disparate systems out there doing different things and trying to bring all this data together. And that's really, it's a big challenge for a lot of organizations. And, we hear about how organizations want to normalize their data and bringing all these things together. But the different data sets are sometimes for different purposes. And if we can normalize this data to really take advantage of it for different use cases, different purposes, that's a huge advantage strategically for organizations and also efficiently for organizations when they're deploying these programs, whether they're resiliency programs or strategic programs within organizations. That's why the one platform, not just for resiliency, but for running your business, is so powerful.
Yeah, and sometimes, sorry, I may want to move on, but
okay.
We talk a little bit about the different functions within a business, but it's natural that functions might create divisions or some walls between those functions. And sometimes we start to replicate information, and this contributes to a little bit to the data chaos that we were talking about earlier. Again, if we can start to not just the data, rationalization, but also the process rationalization, we can start to understand what is going to cause new data to come into our unified platform. Because if we have 3 different processes that are all competing to update the same concept or the same data within the platform, that's worth having a conversation, because there's a much better value if we can start to synchronize. Again, the criminal element wants us to be confused, and they want us to have different versions of the truth. We need to fight back by saying, no, we have one single version of the truth, and we all, whether you all necessarily agree on it, but you can at least agree where it will be, and then you can have your, I call them bun fights in the back.
So I'm hearing a couple of themes here. One is defining what are your critical and key processes that are defining your business. Bringing everything together to almost enforce uniformity, or at least allowing, Kirk, to use your words, the bun fight that needs to happen. And to Aaron's point, using the fact that you're bringing everything together to almost stress test the data. When you jumble the data together, you start to find where things are incorrect, or where things may not be, people may not be in agreement, or may not be trustworthy. And that actually inspires you to result in better data, because you're now forced to create better data and better alignment. And then finally going and assigning numbers and trying to quantify the value of both your processes and your data. And to Kirk, you were mentioning, like, we need to make sure that we are like being bold. Start somewhere. If you think it's $5, put $5. If it's $50, it's $50, 1,000, whatever. And then if someone disagrees or someone has a better way, then you're just better. But at least it's a number that you can assign and you can use a consistent process to align to. Okay. Does anybody have anything they want to add to this section? Oh, before we move on to section 2, which actually is really going into sort of the meat of what we're talking about.
I'm ready to go.
Let's go. Let's assemble the building blocks of a robust resilience program.
You know, Melissa, you kind of, it was a nice segue into this when you say stress test the data.
Mm-hmm.
I actually love that concept because everyone's on a different journey. And when you show me a perfect data set, you know, that'll be the first perfect data set I ever see. Right. So we're all on this journey, and you know, I've also seen organizations that actually spin up a different data set just for resiliency purposes. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Because the instant that you go live with that data set and something changes in your environment, your data is wrong, right? So the more that we can do with that data operationally across different use cases, the better. And, you know, we also get this question of, hey, I'm not really comfortable with the data that I have. Well, guess what? It's the data that's running your business today. Let's start putting a process in place that we can mature that data over time. And therefore, it's going to increase the value and the overall resilience of your program. So, you know, a lot of you know, people or organizations can look for excuses around not to proceed, but in reality, the best cure for murky data is to start this process and to put the process in place that will show your journey for progression moving forward.
Yeah, and under the theme of, you know, assembling the building blocks, first thing I'd like to assert is that not all blocks are the same size. I think when we used to use that analogy, you know, years ago, I think we all drew the Lego page and we started to assemble this very uniform. You need to do these 4 blocks first, then these 3 blocks, etc. In the way that the world is going and the way that we are trying to transform digitally, and I'm not a big fan of digital transformation, so I'm just going to reverse the words to make it mine. But I think what we want to do is we want to do things in smaller increments to achieve some result, and almost do a bit of an A/B test, to borrow from a marketing term. And we want to see, did we get the right result, or are we not achieving what we need to do? So if you have a lot of smaller building blocks along with the bigger building blocks, it allows you to make some progress in a certain area very incrementally while you're putting in this bigger part of your program. The other thing that I think is true is being able to understand. I like an analogy of a data stream. So when a piece of data enters the data stream as you are doing your transformation, if you're collecting like a name of something or a location of something, maybe it's a server 123 and it's located in, you know, a data center in Chicago. As soon as I capture that data, that is where I'm going to capture that data, and I'm always going to capture it there. But what truly happens is we start to bring in other versions of server 123 and different location. Like it's not the data center, it's in a colo within a suburb of Chicago, but now it's confusing. Can we actually do instant response that way? So the things that are going to leverage that information are dependent on these building blocks being coordinated. And almost like a master builder, like to use the analogy to the nth degree, but like a master mason will understand what the formation is going to look like, and they will very purposely put those blocks in the right place. So I'm not a big fan of the house analogy anymore. I like to think of things as a core, but that data stream is something very important to keep in mind. is that you should feed those blocks one time. And if you can do that, I think, Aaron, to your point about never a perfect data set, I think when we start to aspire towards a much cleaner and better data set.
And I think that, and I'm going to point out, I'm very disappointed you're no longer big on the house theory, because I still love like the house metaphor. So I'm going to keep using it. But I think that we're hitting on a bit of a theme here with regards to technical implementations. And that is making sure that even though we're talking about data, and we're talking about something that is usually resides in a technical implementation, we're actually talking about results that need to be achieved within your corporation or within your company. And the results are what matter the most. You can have a data set that might be defined as absolutely perfect, but if it doesn't actually achieve the results that your company needs to accomplish, you're never going to actually define what success is. So it's often important to think about the questions that you're getting before you try and figure out how are you going to create the answers. And being able to bring everybody together to understand, like, the questions are part of those building blocks. And it can start to help galvanize everybody to understand, okay, if I need to know what is the size of my attack surface and what is the potential exposure, that's a very big question, but that can turn into a series of building blocks that I think can help your organization work together and galvanize.
Yeah, and Melissa, just to add to that too, is these building blocks, I'm okay with organizations starting small, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with a few key these building blocks. Let's have success around them, show how it's impacting and affecting the organization. And it's a lot easier to open up the lens within programs with some successes than, go full bore with all these key metrics and have dashboards that are showing empty or incomplete, or that then you're causing more distrust in your process and the data. Mm-hmm. So let's, I love it when organizations start small and then build upon those things with the vision of where they want to be, right? You always have to have that vision of where you want to go. But let's get some of these early successes on. Let's show people the value, market that to the organization, start building your disciples within your organization to get the word out, and growing your program from there.
I was going to say the concept of assembling building blocks, it also assumes then that you're trying to have like a bigger picture of the assembly itself. So to try and coordinate those blocks. So which block comes first? I know Melissa and you and I have been in different workshops where I'm going to say owners of these blocks will come in and they will say, no, I need to go first. I need to have this win. And when they hear the other block owners, we'll call them, describe what their need is, why it's a priority, and what it will do for the business, they understand that actually I need your block to be in place first because I can leverage the things that you do. And that's why looking at it from that perspective is really important. The other thing I'm going to say is that ServiceNow has done a good job of coming up with I'm going to call it a methodology or philosophy called the Common Services Data Model. And for all intents and purposes, it is data modeling. It's also block modeling, if you want to take it back to our topic here. And it's understanding, if I do these blocks, what will I get from each of the block, the Common Services Data Model. And I know there's some of the participants interested in doing the CNDB, et cetera. And that I really do think it is a linchpin, but it's very key to this conversation. Because if we can understand how we can implement that properly, it will empower things like better mean time to repair, better mean time to respond to a security incident or a vulnerability, but only when we can organize. And that's coming back to sort of unifying on one platform.
I'm just taking notes because people are saying such good things that I want to make sure I keep them in mind for the future too. I'm hearing a couple of themes here. One is keep the results in mind, focus on the results that you want to achieve with that data. Starting small is better than not starting at all, or perfect is the enemy of good. That's Naima. As well as bringing everybody together again into that one data model, I think really helps, because it also means that rather than one group having to do the work again and recreate the wheel, they can actually leverage the work of the people who've come before. And they can realize that their lives can be made easier by working between the silos or breaking down the silos as much as possible to be successful. Let's look at action 3.
All right.
So we want to be able to establish criteria for trustworthy data. And Aaron, I'm curious, from your perspective, what would you consider to be criteria for trustworthy data?
It's process, kind of like location, location, location. And so, having a process that's in place that, is not just like, so certainly data governance boards are becoming more and more of a common theme and requirement for organizations as they're looking to leverage this data. So, defining what the responsibility of a data governance board, what that process looks like, a change management board, certainly within your CMDB, but then to put that process in place that's efficient so that we're not slowing people down, slowing development down, but then we're instilling this confidence within the data that we're not allowing rogue individuals with really good intentions, muddy the waters with data that has not been kind of cleared for your enterprise type level of data. So, there's a people part of this, there's a process part of it, and there's a technology part of it that we all need to take into account when we're defining these resiliency programs and how they work with the business, right? It's that's the power of doing resiliency on ServiceNow, is that we are working with the business. So, be careful what you ask for. This is a powerful thing, and by setting up the processes up front appropriately will pay huge dividends down the line.
And I think when we talk about, and we talk about this all the time, I know that we do, and we're sort of maniacal on this concept, but we're working, and it's around enterprise visibility and trust. Very, very symbiotic to this conversation. But one of those key elements is understanding where you're getting your data from. So doing a bit of a source analysis and a target analysis is really important, because if you're like every other business that we've dealt with, you will have multiple sources for the same type of information. If you're lucky, you'll have one source, and there are a few elements within your overall system, you probably will have just one source. But for the most part, especially when you get into technology information, and remember the early stat is the CISO has over 16 cybersecurity tools. All of those tools are feeding very like information. So while the source analysis is really important, so you can do the ratification, is also the reconciliation. So what are you going to do when you do have multiple sources that are coming through with the same piece of information, whether it be at the attribute level or not, but the same type of descriptors? And it's really important that you understand the quality of information. So I love a concept about assigning a level of trust to each of those sources. So not everything is equal. So if you have subscriptions to 3 data services and 2 of them are internal, you might assign a higher level of trust to those 2 internal if you believe that. But it's actually worth taking the time to understand, how traceable is that information? Where can you show me where that originated? Because if you're in a regulated industry, the more systemic or systematic your processes are, the more the regulators love it. But whether you're regulated or not, the same premise holds true, is that the more you can take, I'm going to say, humans out of the flow of information where they can be involved in transforming it or mutating it, we don't want that. We want some traceability. So being able to do that analysis is really critical about establishing that trust, because I would say that if you can pick a corner of what you're doing and you can apply this model to it, and you can start to gain that trust of the organization, then they will start to believe that, all right, they're going to apply that same pattern model to the rest of the platform. Because unfortunately, once we lose trust, it's very, very hard to get it back.
So I think that really what we're hearing is again, it's about starting small, being able to create early successes. It's about keeping the results in mind. It's about choosing the right processes to base everything around. Like Aaron, to your point, we want processes to kind of start first. And being able to, Kirk, you've talked a lot about like identifying your sources, being able to identify them and seeing the quality of data, seeing where they come from, and really stress testing, again, that quality and your level of trust within that data, and trying to pick processes that can be systematized. I'm going to stop trying to make up a word, making them systemic so that they can be less error prone, because humans usually are the weakest link, both in data and in like security. So being able to make it as automated as possible as well, and identifying those candidates for automation early so that you can sort of create that success and be able to create the momentum.
Yeah, Melissa, one thing I'd add to that is that the more use cases that are leveraging the data, the better. So it's like these better together stories where you can have resiliency, leveraging the same data set as a governance, risk, and compliance use cases, as cybersecurity use cases, as operational resiliency use cases, as use cases for running your business that require process mapping across the board. If we bring all those things together, in my opinion, that's the holy grail to a resilient and also strategic, operationally efficient organization. So when we can get to that point or have that vision for that, that's when the data just starts compounding the value upon itself.
Can I take another minute and just talk about, so New Rocket, we use a phrase around these golden attributes. So we've identified things within your platform that will drive exponential value, not one for one. It is like 15 or 100 times value. And the way we analyze that is take a look at what we're talking about. And maybe it's the support group. And if you fill in the support group with high confidence, high fidelity, you can drive out automated assignments. You can drive out ownership. You can fulfill the obligations of a RACI within that. You can also understand that how many other sub-processes within your organization leverage that key attribute. And I've seen it where it's literally leveraged 100 different times in different processes. That one piece of data now becomes super critical to be accurate. You cannot have bad data in that. And if you maintain that in a proper level of custodianship, you will maintain the trust of the organization. I think it's very, very key.
Mm-hmm. So identifying like the attributes that can be reusable and making sure that those are really centralized and are part of central to how the process is governing them. I think the other thing that I'm hearing is we're talking a little bit about how organizations generally are built in silos. We talked a lot in the previous webinar on how to demolish silos. And really, even though companies are sort of hierarchically built in silos, they're socially and technically unified. So business needs to work with IT. Business processes are generally, especially due to the transformation in the digital age, to avoid the phrase digital transformation as well. But due to that, it's often processes are supported by technology. So whether a business group wants to work with a technology group or not, or whether or not they are sharing information across one system or not, they genuinely need to. And that silo is getting in the way of good data. And that silo is getting in the way of the business becoming more resilient.
And technology is one of the natural ways to encourage change, right? Because it reinforces, habits are tough to break. And, just the organizational machinery, it's tough to change. And so systems can help do that because we encourage it, we enforce it, and can report on it. And let's be honest, this isn't easy stuff.
Right.
This takes time. This takes discipline. This takes dedication. It takes, senior leadership. It takes grassroots, commitment to make these things happen. So, but by looking at from people, process, and technology, it will certainly lead you to this promised land that is so key for organizations to really grow and thrive and be resilient into the future.
Yeah. And Aaron, you just took words out of my mouth because I thought it would be good that we actually take a minute to say, listen, we're not saying that this is like snap your fingers and go. This is something that takes a lot of work. But it is something that we think is incredibly valuable work. It will be life-changing work for your organization. And you just have to start. You need to start. Find that. I think you used the corner. Kirk was the phrase that you used, like find a corner where you can create success and then start to build on that success. And you will make your daily lives better. You will make your organizations more resilient. You will make things more successful. And I think that this is very achievable. It just really takes the time and the effort to do so. I'd like to give the opportunity for the audience to ask us some questions. So we'll give everybody a second to see if there are any questions. While that happens, I'd like to express my gratitude to everybody who is attending this webinar or is listening to this webinar on a recording. This is 45 minutes you've taken out of your day. I think it just shows to me the value that you've created or that you feel that we're providing you. And I'm hoping that we are actually providing you. And especially for those of you who may have listened to all 3 webinars, it's a little over 2 hours of your time. So thank you so much. We do have first question. So they have a company that is currently using several platforms that they're using to manage their data. And they're wondering, how would you start to unify around one platform? How do you choose the one platform? And how do you get alignment? And Aaron, I know your answer about which platform to choose might be like almost like an easy question. So I'd actually like Kirk to start with this question on how do you choose a platform and how do you start to unify?
Yeah, I actually don't think it has. We're not at the platform level yet. I think when I start to answer that question, because again, understanding, yes, it is about the data that you're trying to manage and on the several platforms, but those platforms are again supporting other key processes. So I'd like to understand, first of all, what are the key processes? Because sometimes a platform is very purpose built and it has some great features and functions, and people get very hung up on that. But then they lose the bigger value of having a unified data model. And again, I'm not at the platform yet. I'm at the sort of the data model. If we can get that data connected and reduce the duplication or triplication or just the replication of the same piece of information, the business starts to become stronger. So it really is about identifying those key processes, what type of information is being captured or manipulated in those key processes, and then understanding, can we bring it onto a single platform? Now, this is where, maybe we talk about a little bit about ServiceNow and the approach that we use, and that is now we start to understand that data model and trying to place where would it fit at the very earliest part in that data stream that I was talking about. And if it can fit early in that data stream, then I think that we can start to eliminate some of the duplication and start to plan for, I'm going to say, the retirement of some of those other platforms, because ultimately you don't want to maintain those others. You want to be able to retire those. And again, whatever one wins should be the one that can do the most for the business on that one data model.
Hey, Kirk, I'm 100% with you, right? This is not the ServiceNow centric, discussion that I'm here for, but it's true. It's like, look at the purpose. What's the purpose that we're trying to accomplish here with the data? That purpose will drive your strategy. And then also you look at the technology that you have. I always fall back on the three-legged people, process, and technology. Is that, okay, we have the purpose, and then look at the technology. What technology can we use to help enforce these data governance rules? What's the technology that can provide the workflow that can help normalize the data on the fly while people are doing their daily jobs, right? What's the platform that can report on the data anomalies that need to be addressed? How can we put these proper change control mechanisms in place to keep us all honest? Because we're all not perfect. The technology is not perfect and the process isn't perfect, but where can we do it in the most optimal way to work together in a collaborative manner? So, there's a lot of different ways to address it. But it's really defining, what's that live fire, what's that purpose that we're trying to accomplish, and have that drive on how we're going to do it, and making sure you have the proper people, process, and technology behind it to make it happen.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I want to actually talk a little bit about alignment and how to get alignment, but I want to make sure that we've received a second question that goes into alignment, which is really that this particular individual has consolidated their data before, but teams couldn't agree on what's most important. So they each looked at data differently, and we couldn't get them into the same, to come to a common agreement. So in alignment with question, sort of that final question in question one, and in this question two, let's see how many times Melissa can say the word question in 30 seconds. How would you recommend organizations achieve alignment across data?
That company is definitely alone, right?
Yeah, no company ever has had that problem, right? Never occurred. We've never heard this.
Did we say that this is hard, right? And then that's the people part of this puzzle, is to have that strategic direction around what you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to report on? What are your goals that you're trying to get there? And have those things drive the decisions. Because once you take the emotions out of these decisions, it becomes pretty clear around how to filter up on what level of data that you're trying to accomplish. But certainly those emotions and those consensus building that happens within these kind of hard discussions are hard for a reason, right? Because we all care about it and we all have our opinions. But when we kind of pull away the emotions from it and we look to the overall strategic goals and visions of organizations, that's when we all start to come together, because it's the facts and not the opinions that rule. And that's easier said than done.
Yes.
For there too.
Took the words out of my mouth. You need to remove emotion, and we all
Yeah.
feel very personal about the programs or the systems that we brought to the organization. We believe that they were a bit of a gift. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put our own personal capital and our career on the line. But if you remove that, I love using a term like attribution. And you need to start with the strategy, the key objectives for the executives or their different functions, and then work your way down. Because I would always come back to an old Napoleon Hill phrase, and that is, how do you know? And I need to be able to see the traceability, and it serves this purpose on being able to rationalize this information, but it also down the road will help you understand the value of each of those, literally at the attribute level within those blocks of information. So as Aaron beautifully said, take the emotion out of it, make this become an exercise about how are you supporting your objectives.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think as well, getting everybody into a room and starting to get agreement and alignment through understanding what's important to each group and making sure that you can balance that out can also be extremely helpful. Like, I think that often these conversations end up happening because we're busy, because in sort of the post-COVID world, the meetings tend to run back to back to back. I think that it can be easy to try and solve these things via email or via Teams. There's so much value even getting on like virtually into a room or physically into a room to try and achieve alignment. And I think that as well, that executive North Star is critical, because then you start to be able to use that as your touchstones for the program as to what do you need to implement, how do you need to do this, and which alignment or which decision achieves that best. And it starts to clarify the need to be making those decisions. That is all the time we really have for today. There isn't much time to answer any additional questions. So I wanted to say thank you to my fellow panelists for joining me. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Kirk. I appreciate the time that you spent to share your wisdom and your thoughts. And please feel free, everybody, if you have additional questions or if you'd like to get personalized resilience insights from either me or from Kirk, you can scan the QR code that's currently on your screen. Either one of us would be happy to have a meeting with you to discuss your own individualized needs and be able to move you forward. And we can bring Aaron in if it looks like it would be helpful. So thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days.